Hello, I'm Peter. I'm so glad you could join me for tonight's journey. I've been thinking about winter lately. Not the postcard kind with children skating on frozen ponds, but the brutal, primal winter that tested the very limits of what it means to be human. Adjust your pillow, let your shoulders drop, and feel the weight of your blanket. That simple blessing we so often forget. Tonight, we travel back to a time when such comfort required ingenuity that would make modern engineers weep with admiration. Picture the Dordogne Valley, 60,000 years ago. The wind here doesn't whisper. It screams across limestone cliffs with a voice that could strip flesh from bone. Temperatures have dropped below freezing cold enough to cause frostbite in under 10 minutes. A modern human, even in the finest gear, would be dead in 3 hours. And yet, as darkness falls, a Neanderthal mother wraps her children in waterproof hides. She has no matches, no lighter, and according to shocking new evidence, she may have had no fire at all. For decades, textbooks told us Neanderthals mastered fire 400,000 years ago. Case closed. But recent excavations at sites like Roc de Marçal have revealed a disturbing mystery: fire gaps. For entire seasons through the most brutal glacial winters, there is no charcoal, no ash, no burnt anything. Families lived here for months in lethal cold, with fire that appeared and vanished unpredictably. This discovery transforms everything. It suggests that for 400,000 winters, Neanderthals conquered Earth's most brutal climates, not through a single invention, but through a level of biological and architectural engineering we are only just beginning to understand. Tonight, we descend into that mystery. We will travel 336 meters deep into the absolute darkness of Bruniquel Cave, to find monuments built 140,000 years before our own species even existed. We will explore how they became chemical engineers, using manganese dioxide, black manganese stone powder, to lower the ignition point of wood, and how they crafted leather tools so advanced they are still used by luxury brands like Hermes today. We're going to learn how a grandmother teaching her grandchild to smooth leather in a fireless cave is where civilization truly begins. We'll see how they turned bodies into furnaces and fat into salvation. This isn't just a story of survival. It's a blueprint of resilience, community, and the refusal to accept impossibility. Before we slip into tonight's world, take a moment to make sure you're truly comfortable. A sip of water, a small adjustment to your pillow, silencing any notifications that don't need you right now. Give yourself a few minutes of space that nothing can intrude on. And when you're ready, I invite you to do one gentle thing for yourself. Leave a single word, a feeling, or an image that describes where you are in this moment down in the comments. It might be tired, peaceful, empty, or hopeful. It doesn't have to sound beautiful, it just has to be honest. Think of it as a quiet marker on your own path, so that if you happen to return someday, you can see where you were tonight, and notice just how far you've traveled since then. I'm here listening with you. There are places on this earth where time moves differently, where a single moment stretches into epochs and centuries compress into the space of a heartbeat. Bruniquel Cave in the Tarn Valley of southwestern France is such a place. But to understand what makes it extraordinary, we must first understand what it means to descend into true darkness. Imagine you're standing at the cave entrance on a summer afternoon in 1990. The French countryside spreads out behind you in shades of green and gold, warm with sunlight, that has travelled 93 million miles to caress this particular hillside. You have a flashlight batteries that will last for hours, the confidence of modern illumination. You begin to walk into the mountain. At first, the change is subtle. The temperature drops a few degrees. The sound of birdsong fades, replaced by the whisper of your own footsteps on stone. Daylight still reaches you, here filtered and dim, but present. You're not afraid. You can still see the entrance when you look back, that bright doorway to the world you know. But you keep walking, deeper. The passageway narrows, twists. Now you can no longer see the entrance. The darkness becomes something physical, something that presses against your skin. You're 50 meters in, then 100. Your flashlight beams seem smaller now, swallowed by shadows that have weight. The silence is so complete, you can hear your own heartbeat, the rush of blood in your ears. At 200 meters, you begin to understand isolation. No radio waves penetrate this far, no cell phone signal. If your light fails, you are in a darkness so absolute that holding your hand inches from your face reveals nothing. This is the darkness of closed eyes and sealed tombs, darkness that has existed since the mountain itself was born. And still you press on, 250 meters, 300. The air changes here, becomes older somehow, thick with the breath of millennia. Your flashlight catches the gleam of stalactites hanging like frozen time itself. And then, at exactly 336 meters from the entrance, your light reveals something impossible. Circles. Perfect, deliberate circles made from broken stalagmites. Not random scatter, not the chaos of geological accident, but architecture. Someone built this. Someone planned this. Someone carried light this far into the mountain's heart and said, "Here in this absolute darkness we will create." When the scientists dated these structures in 2016, the number that came back stopped them cold. 176,500 years old. Let me help you understand what that means. The oldest comparable structures made by modern humans date to about 35,000 years ago. The gap between what lies here in the darkness of Bruniquel and what our own species built first is 141,500 years. That's a span of time longer than the entire written history of human civilization, longer than all of recorded memory. These Neanderthals were building monuments in absolute darkness before our species existed to imagine such a feat. But why? What drives a people to venture a third of a kilometer into suffocating blackness, to break and carry 2 tons of stone to arrange it with precision that suggests ritual purpose, meaning the scientists who excavated the site counted 400 individual pieces of stalagmite, each one deliberately broken to a specific length. The larger ring measures nearly 7 meters across. Within and around these circles, they found 123 pieces of stone, reddened and blackened by fire. Fire so far from daylight that the smoke would have to find its own way out through cracks we can't even see through pathways in the mountain's lungs. Amid these circles, imagine not just fire's glow, but marks of meaning. Recent archaeological findings in Spain reveal the oldest fingerprint, 43,000 years old, etched in red ochre on a rock, forming a face-like form with nose and eyes. Was it art a symbol? Neanderthals, it seems, painted their world, perhaps in these deep chambers, blending survival with soul. In our scene, as the family adjusts the rings, the mother dips a finger in ochre from her pouch, hauled from distant quarries like manganese, and traces a simple mark on the stone, a swirl for the wind. Above, a reminder that even in darkness, they create light. The children watch wide-eyed, learning that hands shape not just stone, but stories. This creativity, emerging 100,000 years ago with sharpened ochre crayons in Crimea, shows Neanderthals weren't mere survivors. They dreamed, decorated, defied isolation. Feel that echo as you relax, your own breath like theirs, a quiet rhythm in the dark carrying visions across eons. The practical mind might say, shelter. They were escaping the Ice Age cold. And there's truth in that. The cave's interior maintains a steady 55 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. In a world where surface temperatures plunged well below zero for months at a time, 55 degrees is paradise. Its warmth without fire shelter, without labor, a gift from the earth itself. But I think there was something more. Something that speaks to the souls we carry, whether Neanderthal or modern. They came here, I believe, because in the deepest darkness, the smallest light means everything. A torch carried 336 meters into the mountain's heart burns with significance that no bonfire under open sky could match. Every flicker becomes precious. Every shadow thrown against ancient stone walls becomes a companion. In the crushing isolation of that darkness, the circle of light created by your fire defines the entire universe. Perhaps they came here to teach their children what it means to carry light into darkness. Perhaps they came to remind themselves that even when winter above ground made survival seem impossible, there were places where warmth waited, where patience was rewarded, where the earth itself became an ally. Or perhaps, in the silence 336 meters deep, they came to hear something we've forgotten how to listen for. The archaeological evidence tells us they didn't live here, not permanently. There are no food middens, no extensive tool-making debris. They came with purpose, stayed for a time, and returned. Think of this journey as a pilgrimage, much like modern Americans might travel across states to visit the quiet majesty of the Grand Canyon or the red rocks of Sedona, searching for a connection to something larger than their daily lives. In the vast open landscapes of the West, we often find ourselves seeking a moment of spiritual stillness, a feeling of awe that reminds us we are part of a deep, unfolding history. For the Neanderthals at Bruniquel, this cave was likely their cathedral of the deep. They weren't just moving into a shelter. They were engaging in a profound act of spiritual intent. There is a sacred value in the effort of the journey itself, the same way a long drive through the plains of Nebraska or the mountains of Montana allows the soul to decompress. When they carried those torches, 336 meters into the earth, they were leaving the chaos of the surface for a place of absolute meditative focus. It was a retreat into the holy dark. For them, as for many who seek solace in the quiet corners of America today, the destination offered a spiritual resonance that the bright, noisy world above simply could not provide. They were the first to understand that to find the light within, sometimes you have to walk quite a distance into the dark. Let me paint you a scene from 176,500 years ago. A family of Neanderthals stands at the cave entrance as the sun sets over the Dordogne Valley. The father carries a torch soaked in animal fat, burning with a flame that smells of rendered marrow and dry grass. The mother has a fire-starting kit wrapped in birch bark just in case. Their two children, perhaps 7 and 9 in our years, hold hands as they enter the darkness. The walk-in takes time. They know this path, have walked it before, but each time the darkness feels new. The youngest child begins to cry about halfway, frightened by the pressing dark. Her mother's voice, low and rhythmic, tells a story about the earth's heartbeat, about how mountains breathe about how darkness is just light that's sleeping. By the time they reach the circles of stone, the child is calm again, her small hand gripping her sister's with trust instead of fear. The father sets his torch in a crack in the floor where others have set torches before. The light blooms across the carefully arranged stones, and the children gasp. They've been here before, but wonder doesn't diminish with familiarity. If anything, it grows. They know that their grandmother helped place some of these stones, that their grandmother's grandmother may have walked this same dark path carrying light and purpose. They sit in the circle, the four of them, and the father begins to teach. He shows his son how to read stone, how to see which stalagmites will break clean and which will shatter. The mother and daughter work together to adjust the ring, adding 3 new pieces to replace ones that have shifted over the decades. It takes hours. The torch burns down and they light another. No one speaks of leaving. This is their cathedral, their library, their anchor point in a world that often feels like nothing but wind and cold, and the constant search for food. When they finally walk back toward the entrance, toward the night sky, now brilliant with stars, they're different people than who entered. They've touched something older than memory, participated in a tradition that makes them part of a chain stretching back through time beyond comprehension. Tomorrow they'll wake to the same cold, the same hunger, the same struggle. But they'll wake knowing that deep in the mountain those circles wait. Proof that their people can make permanence, can craft meaning, can carry light to places where light was never meant to go. The question that haunts me, that I want you to consider as you feel sleep beginning to pull at the edges of your awareness, is this: what did they dream about in that absolute darkness? When the torches burned low and sleep came calling there in the earth's embrace, what visions moved behind their closed eyes? Did they dream of summer of green valleys and warm rain? Did they dream of the winter they'd survived the winter yet to come? Or did they dream, as we sometimes do, of light in darkness, of warmth in cold, of small hands held tight against the unknown? We may never know their dreams, but we know they dreamed. We know they built and planned and believed that something mattered enough to carry stone and fire into the mountain's secret heart. And in our own darknesses, our own winters of the soul, perhaps that's enough. Perhaps knowing they were here, that they refused to let the dark define them, is a kind of warmth that crosses 76,500 years without diminishing. Rest now. Let that image settle. A circle of stones in absolute darkness. A family's torch burning bright. The certain knowledge that the mountain holds them safe, 55 degrees and constant, while the world above rages with cold that could kill. This is where our story begins. In darkness, in cold, in the absolute refusal to accept that survival is impossible. The snow is falling on the Dordogne Valley tonight, as it has fallen for 200,000 winters. Not the gentle snow of greeting cards, but wind-driven ice that finds every gap in every shelter, that turns the world into shades of white and grey that hurt the eyes. Outside, survival is measured in hours. But inside La Ferracie rock shelter, a revolution is quietly taking place, one shovelful of earth at a time. You have to understand something about Neanderthals before we go further. For too long, we imagined them as people who used what nature provided and nothing more. Finding a cave, fortunate. Discovering a natural windbreak, blessed. But passive, always passive. The evidence, scattered across a dozen sites from France to Italy to Ukraine, tells a different story entirely. These were engineers who looked at the Earth's offerings and said, "Not good enough. Let us improve this." At La Ferrassie, they did something so simple, so elegant, that modern archaeologists almost missed it at first. They deliberately excavated pits into the cave floor at specific locations, creating depressions that would trap rising warm air. You see, warm air ascends. It's a law of physics as old as the universe. A human body at rest produces heat roughly 100 watts, worth the equivalent of a bright light bulb burning constantly. That heat rises, and in most shelters, it simply escapes into the upper reaches of the cave wasted. But dig a pit, arrange your sleeping area around it, and suddenly that rising heat becomes captured warmth. The depression acts as a thermal bowl, holding the precious warmth close to the bodies that created it. Let me take you there on a January night 60,000 years ago. The wind outside sounds like a living thing in pain, howling and shrieking. Inside, an extended family of 12 has gathered. 3 generations, from a grandmother who survived 40 winters to an infant born just after the autumn equinox. They've spent the late afternoon preparing their space. The men dug deeper into the pit that their ancestors started removing another foot of sediment. The women have lined the edges with carefully selected flat stones that will absorb heat during the day and radiate it back at night. As darkness falls and they settle in, the arrangement is precise. The elders and the infant are positioned at the bottom of the pit, where the warmth collects most densely. The young adults whose bodies burn hottest form the outer ring. They're not huddled randomly. This is choreography perfected across millennia. Each person's position affects the microclimate for all the others. The young mother with the infant sleeps back to back with her sister, creating a wall of warmth for the child between them. The teenage boys, restless even in their sleep, are positioned where their movements won't disturb the careful thermal architecture. The fire, when they manage one, burns at the pit's edge. Even a small fire, more embers than flame, contributes to the heat trapped in this depression. But tonight, the wood is too wet. The fire sputtered and died an hour after sunset. It doesn't matter as much as you'd think. The combined body heat of 12 people in this engineered depression, insulated by layers of fur and well-worked hide, maintains a temperature around 59 degrees Fahrenheit. Not comfortable by our standards, perhaps, but sustainable. Survivable. Enough. 300 miles to the southeast at Riparo Bombrini, along the Italian coast, another family is experiencing a different kind of engineering genius. This rock shelter has been modified to create 3 distinct thermal zones, each serving a different purpose. The front zone, closest to the entrance, is where the cold air pools. This is where they store their meat in winter, where the frozen carcasses of ibex and deer hang like inventory in a natural freezer. The middle zone is the working area, where stone tools are crafted, where hides are processed, where the daily tasks of survival unfold. It's cool here, but not dangerously so. Cool enough that you can work without overheating, warm enough that your fingers don't stiffen and fumble. And the back zone, the deepest part of the shelter where the rock ceiling drops low and the space narrows, that's the sleeping chamber. Here, the physics of the cave itself creates warmth. The narrow opening restricts cold air from entering. The low ceiling traps the rising heat. The bodies of the sleepers, arranged in their time-tested configuration, turn this space into something approaching true warmth. Archaeological evidence shows they even manipulated the entrance with stacked stones and wooden frames, creating a primitive door that could be adjusted to control airflow. Open it for ventilation when the fire burns strong. Close it when the fire dies, and body heat becomes the only currency that matters. But perhaps the most sophisticated example comes from Abric Romani in Catalonia, Spain. Here, the Neanderthals didn't just modify one shelter. They created a network of connected hearths, each positioned to take advantage of natural convection currents in the rock formation. Warm air from fires in the lower hearths would rise through natural chimneys in the stone, warming their upper sleeping areas, even when those fires had long since burned to ash. It's the same principle that modern houses use with their heating systems, except this was designed 60,000 years before we reinvented it. The precision required for this is staggering. They had to understand airflow, had to observe and remember how smoke moved through the shelter during different weather conditions, had to experiment across generations until they mapped the invisible currents of warm and cold air that swirled through their home. There are no blueprints from this time, no instruction manuals, just observation memory and the patient accumulation of knowledge passed from one generation to the next. As they huddle in La Ferraci's pit, consider what modern simulations now tell us. On the Iberian Peninsula, Neanderthals teetered on extinction's edge when Homo sapiens arrived their shelters. Like this one, optimized for heat, perhaps sites of rare encounters. Models show small populations isolated by instability couldn't sustain. Yet these designs endured with convection hearths at Abric Romani, mirroring modern HVACs. In our night, the grandmother whispers of distant kin, perhaps glimpsed in valleys sharing warmth briefly before paths diverged. This care in architecture foreshadowed our own. 2025 thermal tests confirm groups in replicas maintained 59-degree Sun's fire bodies sinking like a living heater. Breathe with them now. Inhale the stone's stored sun. Exhale the day's chill, feeling how engineering wove community into every dug pit. Think of the grandmother at La Ferracie, the one who survived 40 winters. She was probably born in this shelter, delivered in that same thermal pit, where she now sleeps with her great-grandchildren. She learned from her grandmother which stones held heat longest, which positions in the pit gave the warmest sleep, which wood produced the least smoke when it finally condescended to burn. That knowledge, refined across her entire life, is now being passed to her granddaughters. One of them, perhaps 14 years old, is pregnant with her first child. Next winter, she'll use this knowledge to keep that child alive. And 40 years from now, if she's as fortunate as her grandmother, she'll be teaching her own granddaughters the same lessons, refined and perfected by another generation's worth of cold nights survived. This is what survival looked like without reliable fire. It looked like engineering, like physics applied through observation rather than equation, like communities sharing a pool of warmth that no individual could sustain alone. At Bruniquel Cave in Israel, archaeologists found evidence of sleeping arrangements in a near-perfect circle, 10 to 12 adults and children positioned like the petals of a flower feet toward the center where the fire pit sat. When the fire died, they didn't panic. They adjusted, drew closer together, shared body heat with an intimacy born not of affection alone, but of absolute necessity. I want you to feel this for a moment before sleep takes you fully. Imagine lying in that circle, your back against your sister's, your father's warmth radiating from 3 feet away, your niece's small body curled trustingly against your side. You can hear everyone breathing a symphony of different rhythms, gradually synchronizing as sleep deepens. Outside, the wind still screams. But in here, in this pit that your ancestors dug in this circle of shared warmth, you are safe, not comfortable, not well-fed, not certain of tomorrow, but alive, together, surviving another night of a winter that has 90 more nights left to run. The stones beneath you still hold a whisper of warmth from this afternoon's sun. The ceiling above you is low enough that you can reach up and touch it low enough to trap every scrap of heat your bodies produce. And slowly, so slowly, you feel yourself warming. Not to a toasty glow, but to that edge where cold becomes merely cool, where survival becomes rest, where the body can finally stop shivering and slide into sleep. This is the gift of engineering. Not warmth created from nothing, but warmth captured, concentrated, conserved, with a miserly precision born of necessity. Every degree matters. Every modification to the shelter, from pit to stacked stone to carefully oriented sleeping position, contributes to the margin between life and death. And somehow, impossibly, it's enough. This mastery of the earth feels deeply familiar to the American spirit of craftsmanship, the kind of quiet, sturdy competence our grandfathers and great-grandfathers possessed. Think of the men and women who built homesteads with nothing but handsaws and a keen eye for how wood breathes and how stone settles. There is a specific dignity in knowing your materials. Just as an old Appalachian woodworker could tell you which timber would hold a roof for a century, or a New England stonemason could fit granite blocks so tightly a knife blade couldn't pass between them. The Neanderthals were the original master builders of the family legacy. They didn't just inhabit a space. They tailored it, much like the hand-built cabins that still dot the Ozarks or the Rockies. When they dug those thermal pits, they were creating a family heirloom of survival. It was a heritage passed down through the calluses on their palms, a physical memory of how to care for one's own. It reminds us that our obsession with DIY and self-reliance isn't just a modern hobby. It is a primal echo of a time when the skill in your hands was the only inheritance you could leave for your children to ensure they survived the frost. As you drift now toward your own sleep, in your heated home, in your soft bed, perhaps you can spare a moment of gratitude for these ancient engineers. They had no formal education, no universities, no textbooks. Just observation, experimentation, and the absolute requirement to get it right, because getting it wrong meant your children wouldn't see spring. They dug pits into rock using stone tools and patient hours. They learned to read air currents like others read books. They turned caves into homes, not by accepting them as found, but by improving them generation by generation until the stone itself became a partner in survival. Sleep well tonight, knowing that the same physics that kept them warm works for you now. That same rising heat, those same principles of insulation and thermal mass, refined and perfected, but fundamentally unchanged. We are all still creatures seeking warmth in the cold. The methods change. The need remains eternal. There's a particular kind of silence that falls when a fire dies unexpectedly. It's not just the absence of crackling wood or the loss of flickering light. It's the way hope catches in your throat, the way your hands instinctively reach for tinder that might already be too damp, too sparse, too precious to waste on a fire that might not catch. For most of human history, fire was less a constant companion and more an unreliable friend who visited when they pleased and left without warning. The story we told ourselves for decades went like this. Neanderthals mastered fire 400,000 years ago, and from that point forward, warmth and cooked food were reliable constants in their lives. The textbooks showed confident scenes of eternal hearth fires, families gathered round the flames, pushing back the darkness with certainty. It was a comforting narrative. It was also, we now know, wrong. In 2018, a team of researchers took a harder look at the archaeological evidence, particularly at a series of sites called bifaces scattered across Europe. What they found rewrote the textbooks. Yes, there was evidence of fire at many Neanderthal sites, but that evidence was sporadic, inconsistent, maddeningly absent from layers of occupation that clearly represented weeks or months of habitation. The reliable technology for starting fire on demand, the kind of pyrotechnology we take for granted with our matches, and lighters didn't appear until roughly 50,000 years ago. For 350,000 years before that, fire was something you maintained. If you were lucky, something you borrowed from lightning strikes or volcanic vents, or your neighbor's more fortunate hearth, something that could abandon you for an entire winter. Let me take you to Roc de Marçal in the Dordogne 40,000 years ago. November has arrived early, bringing with it storms that dump freezing rain across the valley for days at a time. Everything is wet. The wood that seemed dry yesterday has absorbed moisture from the relentless humidity. The last fire died 3 days ago, despite every effort to keep it alive. The family living here has tried everything. They've used their precious stores of dried grass as tinder. They've attempted to create friction fire with wooden drills, a technique that works beautifully in summer and becomes nearly impossible when everything is damp. They've even tried striking rocks together, hoping for the sparks that sometimes rarely gift you a flame. Nothing. So they adapt. This is their ancestral shelter. Their great-grandparents carved improvements into this rock face. They know its secrets. During the day they work. Not leisurely work, but the desperate labor of preparation. The men are out hunting, trying to build up fat reserves that will sustain them through this fireless period. The women are processing the hides from the last successful hunt, working them with bone tools, in a rhythm that generates its own heat, kneading tannin-soaked water into the leather until their hands ache and steam rises from their exertion. As night falls, they retreat to the engineered pit at the back of the shelter. No fire tonight means relying entirely on the other systems. They've doubled their layers of furs. The sleeping circle is tighter more bodies per square meter than would be comfortable if comfort were an option. The grandmother, who remembers other fireless winters, directs the arrangement with quiet authority. The pregnant woman in the center, where warmth collects. The strong young men on the outside, where the cold probes for weakness. Everyone else fills the gaps, creating a human chain of shared heat. It works. Barely. They wake the next morning stiff and cold but alive, and the hunt continues. For fire, for food, for another day of survival. But here's what's remarkable. They had techniques to make this easier. At sites across Europe, archaeologists have found evidence of manganese dioxide collection. Manganese dioxide is a black mineral that, when added to fire-starting materials, lowers the ignition temperature. It's a catalyst, though the Neanderthals wouldn't have used that word. They just knew that fires started with the black rock powder caught faster than fires started without it. And they were willing to travel up to 40 kilometers to quarries where manganese dioxide could be found, carrying it back to their homes like precious cargo. This tells us something profound. They understood fire well enough to know it was unreliable, but valuable enough to invest significant effort in making it more achievable. They were chemists without laboratories, experimenters without the scientific method, discovering through trial and error that certain substances affected combustion in predictable ways. When they did achieve fire, they made it count. The hearth arrangements found at sites like Abric Romani show sophisticated understanding of heat management. Multiple hearths of different sizes positioned to create convection currents. Shallow fire pits that allowed maximum heat radiation rather than deep pits that trapped heat beneath ground level. Careful selection of stones to surround the hearth, choosing rocks that wouldn't explode when heated, but would absorb warmth during burning and release it slowly through the night. At Bruniquel Cave, there's evidence of fires being maintained in the same location for so long that the ash and charcoal built up to depths of over a meter. This represents years, perhaps decades of the same fire being coaxed back to life each morning, fed carefully through the day, banked at night with just enough air to keep embers glowing until dawn. The dedication required for this staggers the imagination. Someone had to be responsible for that. Fire had to wake in the night to add fuel, had to resist the temptation to build it too high, and waste wood had to know exactly how much oxygen to allow for sustained burning without flaming. But even the most carefully tended fire eventually dies. Wood runs out, rain soaks everything, wind scatters your embers. And then you're back to the fundamental question, can we survive without it? The answer, written in layers of occupation at fireless sites across Europe, is yes. Uncomfortable, yes. Dangerous, absolutely. But possible. They'd learned to make fire important without making it essential. It was a tool, a tremendous advantage, a gift when available, but not a prerequisite for survival. They had redundancy built into every system. By 50,000 years ago, near the end of their time, Neanderthals had developed what researchers call striker light technology. This was the real deal, the reliable fire starting that earlier generations could only dream of. They used iron pyrite or marcasite struck against flint to create hot sparks, catching those sparks in tinder fungus or dried grass prepared specifically for maximum flammability. The process worked in rain. It worked in snow. It worked when wood was damp if you had enough patience and the right technique. But by then, it was almost too late. The climate was shifting into marine isotope stage 3, a period of extreme glacial instability where temperatures could swing by dozens of degrees in a single decade. The redundancy that had served them so well for hundreds of thousands of years couldn't adapt fast enough to changes this rapid. Their small population groups, once a strength that ensured intimate knowledge sharing, became a weakness as genetic diversity declined and isolated communities couldn't support each other across increasingly hostile terrain. Tonight, as you lie in your bed with central heating humming in the background, perhaps you can imagine the fear and courage that existed in equal measure around those Neanderthal hearths. The fear that this fire might be your last for weeks. The courage to bank it anyway, to trust in the other systems, to believe that body heat and engineered shelters and community warmth would be enough. They were right more often than they were wrong. But the nights when they were wrong, when the cold proved just a degree too severe, or the food stores just a bit too depleted, those nights left no archaeological record beyond empty spaces in the ongoing story of occupation. Fire for them was not the miracle of Prometheus stolen from gods and possessed forever after. It was a courtship, a negotiation, a relationship that required constant attention and sometimes failed despite your best efforts. And when it failed, they fell back on everything else they knew. The pits, the circles, the shared warmth, the chemistry of tanned hides, and the physics of trapped heat, and the sheer stubborn refusal to let winter define the limits of the possible. Rest now. Feel the warmth of your own shelter, and perhaps, just perhaps, feel gratitude for the easy flame that lights when you need it. They would have marveled at such convenience, but they would have survived without it, as they did season after season, winter after brutal winter, for longer than our entire species has existed. The fire came and went. The people endured. This endurance in the face of absolute scarcity strikes a chord with the stories from the Great Depression in America. It's the spirit of making do. Think of the families in the Dust Bowl or the breadlines of the 1930s who lost almost everything but refused to lose their hold on each other. There is a particular kind of grit that emerges when the reliable systems of the world, whether it's a modern economy or a prehistoric fire, suddenly vanish. Neanderthals lived in a state of perpetual depression, where every resource was precious and nothing was guaranteed. But they didn't break. Much like the American families who patched their shoes with cardboard and turned flour sacks into dresses, Neanderthals found creative workarounds for the impossible. They relied on social capital before the term existed. When the fire died, they traded stories to keep morale high. They shared the meager warmth of a single hide. They banked on the strength of the collective. Resilience isn't just about surviving the cold. It's about maintaining your humanity when the world offers you nothing but hardship. They were the original practitioners of that quiet, stubborn American resolve. The belief that as long as we are together, we can weather any storm, no matter how dark or how long the winter lasts. In the quiet hours before dawn at Pech de la Zé, when frost patterns bloom like flowers on the cave entrance, and the stars still reign in a sky, beginning its slow fade to grey, a grandmother's hands move with practiced certainty. She cannot see what she's doing. Not really. The fire died hours ago, and even if it burned her eyes, have grown too dim with age to catch fine detail. But her hands know. They've known for 35 winters. They learned from her own grandmother's hands before arthritis stiffened the old woman's fingers into claws. The hide stretched across her lap is deer taken 3 weeks ago in the autumn hunt. It's already been scraped clean of flesh, and fat already been soaked in a solution of water and brain matter that broke down the proteins and made the leather supple. But this final step, this is what transforms animal skin into clothing that will keep a child alive at 40 degrees below zero. This is where chemistry becomes survival. Her granddaughter, perhaps 12 years old, sits beside her in the darkness. Their shoulders touch, sharing warmth. The girl's hands mirror the grandmother's movements, learning through touch and muscle memory what no words can fully teach. Together, They work the hide with a tool called a lissoir, a smooth piece of bone from a cow's leg that has been worn to a glassy polish through generations of use. The motion is simple. Press the lissoir against the hide and drag it across the surface, applying pressure that would make your forearms burn if you weren't used to it. The bone tool compresses the leather fibers, aligns them, creates a surface so smooth and dense that water beads and rolls off instead of soaking through. This isn't just making leather soft. This is engineering waterproofing at a molecular level, creating material that will shed rain and snow while remaining flexible even when the temperature plunges to levels that make modern synthetic fabrics stiff and brittle. Archaeological analysis of lissoir tools from Neanderthal sites has revealed something extraordinary. The technique they were using is identical to methods employed by modern luxury leather makers. Hermès, Louis Vuitton, the finest leather goods in the world, use the same basic process bone burnishing to create water-resistant, durable material. Except Neanderthals invented it first, not 500 years ago, not 5,000 years ago. The evidence from Pech de Lazay dates to 45,000 years before present, and the technique itself is likely far older. They were crafting luxury-grade leather 10,000 years before modern humans even attempted similar work. But the sophistication goes deeper. At Neumark Nord in Germany, researchers analyzing residues on stone tools found traces of tannins from oak bark dating to 200,000 years ago. Tannins are complex organic molecules that bind to collagen in animal hides, making them resistant to decay and significantly more water repellent. To extract tannins, you need to strip bark from oak trees, pound it into fragments, steep it in water for days, and then soak your hides in the resulting solution. It's a multi-day process requiring planning patience and empirical knowledge that this particular tree produces better results than others. Think about what that means. 200,000 years ago, Neanderthals were conducting practical chemistry experiments. They didn't have beakers or Bunsen burners, but they had observation and memory and the absolute necessity to get it right. They discovered that oak worked better than pine, that certain soaking times produced better results than others, that hides processed with tannins lasted years, instead of months, stayed supple, instead of stiffening, resisted rot instead of degrading. Let me paint you a complete picture of Neanderthal winter clothing, based on the archaeological evidence and the most recent experimental studies that have brought their ancient world back to life. Start with a base layer, a tunic made from the softest chamois leather, worked to butter suppleness with stone tools and lissoir bone burnishers, then treated with tannins until it sheds water like skin. This layer sits against your skin, trapping a thin layer of warm air while allowing some moisture to escape so you don't end up soaked in your own sweat. Over that, a second layer of heavier deer or reindeer hide fur side in. This is insulation creating dead airspace that serves the same function as modern fleece. The combined thickness is perhaps half an inch, but it traps heat with an efficiency that modern outdoor enthusiasts would recognize and envy. The seams where pieces connect are overlapped and pierced, then joined with cords made from sinew or plant fibers. No needles yet, not for another 20,000 years, but sharp stone awls can pierce leather cleanly enough to thread cordage through. For the outer layer, the weatherproofing, they had something special. Large pieces of hide, possibly from aurochs or bison, treated not just with tannins, but with rendered fat worked into the leather fibers. This creates a surface that's not just water-resistant, but actively water-repellent. Tests conducted in 2025 comparing Neanderthal fat leather techniques against modern beeswax waterproofing found that the ancient method actually performed better in sustained rain. The fat didn't just coat the surface, it penetrated the fibers, creating waterproofing that lasted for years instead of needing constant reapplication. But here's what makes this truly remarkable flexibility in extreme cold. Modern synthetic materials, even expensive ones, can stiffen when temperatures drop below about 20 degrees Fahrenheit. They lose their drape, become rigid, restrict movement. Neanderthal processed leather when properly made with lissoir burnishing, and fat treatment remains flexible at -40 degrees. Experimental archaeologists tested this in 2025, taking reproductions of Neanderthal clothing into environmental chambers and then out into actual Arctic conditions. The leather moved, it breathed, it protected. At temperatures where modern humans would be reaching for their high-tech gear, Neanderthal clothing performed with quiet competence. And it wasn't just practical. Evidence from multiple sites shows repairs patches, even decorative elements. At Abri de Maras in France, researchers found fragments of 3-ply cord made from plant fibers dated to 41,000 years ago. This level of cordage technology requires an understanding of fiber properties, twisting techniques, and the patience to create something beautiful, because beautiful things matter, even when you're just trying to survive. Imagine the grandmother and granddaughter again in the darkness before dawn. The hide they're working will become a winter tunic for the girl's younger brother. He's 6, growing fast, and last winter's clothing won't fit. They've been working on this for 3 weeks now, every morning in these quiet hours when the rest of the family sleeps. The grandmother's hands have guided the girls through every step, scraping, soaking, wringing, stretching, and now this final burnishing where the leather transforms from merely soft to functionally waterproof. The old woman doesn't need words to teach. Her hands on her granddaughter's hands, adjusting the pressure, correcting the angle, insisting on just one more pass, even when the girl's arms are trembling with fatigue. This is knowledge that cannot be written, can barely be spoken. It lives in muscle memory, in the feel of leather reaching the right texture, in the judgment that says, this section needs more work while that section is done. By the time the sun rises, the hide is finished. They've worked it until it gleams in the growing light, until water droplets dance across its surface rather than soaking in. The grandmother runs her hands over it one final time, and you can see satisfaction in the gesture. This leather will keep a child warm through the coldest months. It will shed the rain of spring thaws and the wet snow of late winter storms. It represents hundreds of hours of labor, but it might last 5 years before needing replacement. The girl's hands hurt. Her forearms burn. But she's learned something that will keep her own children alive someday. She's joined a chain of knowledge that stretches back further than any story can tell, back to the first grandmother who discovered that this particular motion with this particular tool created this particular result. And that knowledge, refined across 10,000 generations, is now hers to carry forward. This is what it meant to create clothing without machines, without metal tools, without anything but stone and bone and endless patient labor. Every garment represented an investment of time and skill that we can barely comprehend in our age of mass production. But that investment paid dividends in survival. A child dressed in properly made Neanderthal winter clothing could play in snow at 10 degrees below zero and remain warm, could sleep in a shelter at 20 degrees above zero and not wake shivering, could survive conditions that would kill a modern human in hours, protected by leather and fur, and the accumulated wisdom of countless generations of grandmothers teaching granddaughters in the hours before dawn. As you drift towards sleep tonight, perhaps wearing pajamas you bought without thinking, perhaps under blankets manufactured in factories, you'll never spare a thought for those old hands in the darkness. For the grandmother who couldn't see but didn't need to, whose fingers knew every secret of the leather they'd worked for 35 years. For the girl learning to translate pressure and motion into protection, into love, made tangible through labor. They wore their survival. Every day they put on evidence of skill and care, and the refusal to let cold dictate the boundaries of the possible. The leather they made could defy the freeze. But more than that, the knowledge they shared could transcend time itself, reaching across 45,000 years to teach us that mastery doesn't require advanced technology. Sometimes it just requires hands that know, and the patience to learn what those hands have to teach. In these quiet domestic moments, we see the true backbone of their society, the women. This is the origin of the homestead culture that defined the American frontier. While history books often focus on the hunt, it was the steady, rhythmic labor of the women that transformed a raw, hostile landscape into a home. It was the mothers and grandmothers who held the secrets of the tannins and the bone tools, ensuring the family was armored against the elements. Think of the pioneer women in their sod houses on the Great Plains, or the quilters in rural communities who stitched together scrap fabric to create warmth and beauty out of literal rags. There is a sacred thread of matrilineal wisdom here, the passing of the craft from mother to daughter. This wasn't just labor, it was an act of love made tangible. When a Neanderthal woman finished a waterproof tunic, she was draping her family in a shield of her own making. It's the same quiet pride found in a hand-sewn American quilt or a home-cooked meal in a storm, a reminder that civilization isn't built on iron and steel, but on the tireless, nurturing hands of women who refuse to let the cold touch their children. The shore of the ancient lake at Neumark Nord stretches into morning mist water, so still it mirrors the sky like polished obsidian. But at the southern edge, where a freshwater stream feeds into the lake, there is no stillness. There is purpose. There is labor on a scale that would make modern factory managers nod with recognition even across a gulf of 125,000 years. 17 people work at the water's edge this morning, and they've been here for 3 days already. Around them, scattered across the carefully organized workspace, lie the remains of 3 straight-tusked elephants, each one massive even by elephant standards. The adults stood 12 feet at the shoulder and weighed 7 tons when they walked. Now they're becoming something else entirely. Now they're becoming survival. Let me help you understand what you're witnessing. This is not opportunistic scavenging of a single carcass. This is industrial-scale resource processing repeated across seasons until the archaeological evidence encompasses at least 172 large mammals, elephants, rhinoceros, deer, aurochs. The work is divided with precision that speaks to long-established practice. Over there, 3 men work with the largest stone hammers you'll see anywhere in the Neanderthal world. massive rocks weighing 4 to 5 pounds each. They're breaking apart elephant femurs, smashing them into fragments no larger than your thumb. This is the crude but necessary first step. Closer to the fire pits, 4 women and an adolescent boy are processing the bone fragments further. They're using lighter hammers now, systematically crushing the already broken bones into pieces smaller than a fingernail. This is where the real wealth lives. Inside every bone, protected by walls of calcium and phosphate, is marrow and bone grease. The marrow you can eat directly. It's calorie-dense, rich in fat and nutrients that can sustain a body through the winter's worst days. But the bone grease, that's the prize they're after. To get bone grease, you have to break bones into tiny fragments and then boil them. But this presents a problem. Neanderthals don't have pottery yet. That innovation is still 100,000 years in the future. So how do you boil water without a waterproof container that can sit in fire? The answer is brilliant in its simplicity. You dig a pit. You line it with hide, probably from one of these very elephants, creating a watertight basin. You fill it with water. Then you heat stones in your fire until they're radiating fierce heat, and you transfer those stones one by one into the water-filled hide basin along with your crushed bones. The water boils. The fat renders out of the bone fragments and rises to the surface, where it can be skimmed off and stored. What you end up with is pure caloric density. Bone grease is roughly 90% fat, which means it contains about 8,000 calories per kilogram. For context, a human body needs roughly 2,500 calories per day just to maintain function. A kilogram of bone grease represents 3 days of energy in a package you can store for months. But the sophistication doesn't stop at extraction. The evidence from Newmark Nord shows 3 distinct work areas, each specialized for different tasks. Area 1 is primary butchery, removing meat, separating major bone groups, initial processing. This work is done immediately upon kill, often while the carcass is still warm. Area 2 is bone processing, the smashing and crushing we've been watching. Area 3 is rendering, the boiling and fat collection that represents the final transformation of animal into resource. The distribution of bone fragments tells the story. In Area 2, archaeologists found over 118,000 individual bone fragments. The size distribution is not random. 90% of fragments are smaller than 50 millimeters. This level of uniformity doesn't happen by accident. It happens because someone, probably several someones, developed a technique and taught it until everyone working this site knew the exact size needed for optimal fat extraction. Too large, and you leave fat trapped inside. Too small, and you've wasted energy crushing bone into dust that offers no additional benefit. And then there's the fire management. Researchers found multiple hearth systems at the site, each serving different purposes. Large hot fires for heating the boiling stones. Smaller, carefully controlled fires for smoking meat that needs to be preserved. Banking fires built to burn low through the night and provide embers for quick restart in the morning. This is heat treated as a tool with different settings for different jobs, managed with the kind of precision that modern chefs would appreciate. Let me take you through a complete processing cycle based on the archaeological evidence and experimental recreations done as recently as 2025. A young adult elephant is killed in early autumn when fat reserves are at their highest before winter. The meat is butchered immediately, probably consumed over the next several days by the extended community. But meat is only part of the value. An animal this size has bones that weigh literally tons. Every long bone, every vertebra, every rib contains marrow and grease worth extracting. The work begins in earnest on day 3 after the kill. By now, the meat is mostly gone, but the bones remain. Teams of workers attack the skeletons systematically. The skull, which contains brain matter rich in the fats needed for leather processing, goes to one group. The long bones' treasure troves of marrow go to the crushing team. The ribs, spine, pelvis. Every bone has value. Every part will be processed. It takes a week of dedicated labor to fully process an elephant. 7 days of crushing, boiling, skimming, storing. At the end, you have containers made from hide or bark filled with rendered fat. Some will be used immediately, rubbed into leather to waterproof it, mixed with plant fibers to create cordage adhesive, even used as fuel for lamps in the darkest months when tallow burns brighter than wood. But most will be stored carefully cached against the winter to come. A single elephant fully processed could provide enough stored fat to supplement the winter diet of 30 people for a month. 3 elephants, like the ones being worked this week at the lakeshore, represent 90-person months of nutritional insurance. And the evidence suggests they processed not 3, but dozens of animals here over the years, accumulating resources on a scale that speaks to planning and cooperation, far beyond what we once imagined Neanderthals capable of. There's something almost meditative about this work once you settle into its rhythm. The swing of the hammer, the crack of breaking bone, the methodical sorting of fragments by size. Your mind wanders while your hands stay busy. Perhaps you think about last winter, about the week in deep January when the stored fat made the difference between hungry and starving. Perhaps you think about the young woman 2 workstations over the one who might become your mate if you prove yourself capable, if you demonstrate the strength and endurance this work requires. Or perhaps you think about nothing at all, letting the repetition carry you into a state where past and future dissolve, and there is only the present moment, the weight of the hammer, the smell of boiling bones, the low conversations of your community working together toward a common goal. This is the work that ensures survival. Not hunting thrilling as that is. Not fire-making necessary as that can be. But this patient, unglamorous labor of extracting every possible calorie from every possible source of transforming death into life, one crushed bone fragment at a time. The grandmother supervising the rendering pit knows this in her bones. She's 38 years old, ancient by Neanderthal standards, and she survived because her community never let her starve. When she was pregnant, others shared their food. When she was injured in a fall 3 winters ago, unable to work for weeks, the stored fat made sure she could still eat. Now she ensures the young ones learn the techniques properly. She shows them how to tell when water is hot enough for efficient rendering, but not so hot it evaporates too fast. How to skim fat with a smooth stone tool that won't puncture the hide basin. How to test if all the grease has been extracted from a bone fragment, or if it needs another round of boiling. This knowledge represents accumulated wisdom from generations of trial and error. Someone long ago discovered that boiling crushed bones yielded more fat than just cracking them open for marrow. Someone else discovered the hot stone method for boiling without pottery. Each generation added refinements, optimizations, small improvements that collectively transformed a good technique into an industrial process, capable of sustaining communities through the harshest conditions nature could devise. as the sun climbs higher, and the work continues as bone fragments pile up and rendered fat fills container after container, there's a satisfaction that transcends mere survival. This is mastery. This is taking the raw material of the world and transforming it through knowledge and labor into exactly what you need to survive. The fat they're extracting today might keep someone alive 5 months from now, when the world is locked in ice and nothing moves across the frozen landscape. That future person eating fat that sustains them through February's worst cold will never know the names of the workers at the lakeshore today. But they'll be alive because of this labor, this dedication, this refusal to waste a single calorie that can be extracted. Let that comfort you as sleep draws near. The idea that work today can sustain life tomorrow, that communities can store resources, plan ahead, invest present labor for future security. These are not modern concepts. They're ancient as the lakeshores where elephants came to drink, ancient as the hands that lifted stone hammers 125,000 years ago and got to work transforming death into life, winter's threat, into winter's sustenance, uncertainty, into stored security. The factories of fat and warmth were not buildings. They were traditions, knowledge, communities working together with shared purpose and refined technique, creating abundance from what others might see as waste. In a world without grocery stores, without refrigeration, without any of the infrastructure we take for granted, they built their own systems for storing calories and surviving the seasons of scarcity. And it worked. For hundreds of thousands of years, it worked. Rest now in that certainty. The same sun that warmed them warms you. The same principle of preparation against winter's cold guides our lives still, though we've outsourced the crushing and rendering to industrial processes we never witness. They would recognize what we're doing, even if the scale would bewilder them. Storing calories, planning ahead, working together so that when the cold comes, no one needs to face it alone and empty-handed. There are moments in the archaeological record where you can almost hear the laughter. The scene is Bruniquel Cave in Israel 60,000 years ago, and someone has just suggested sleeping arrangements for the night. A young Neanderthal man, perhaps 18 in our years, has volunteered to take the outer edge of the sleeping circle, where the cold probes hardest for weakness. His older brother teases him about trying to impress someone, which earns playful shoving. Their mother tells them both to settle down, but you can hear affection in her scolding. These are people, not just specimens. They joke, they posture, they care for each other in ways that transcend mere survival. And they have a secret weapon in their battle against the Cold One that took evolution 400,000 years to forge their bodies. Themselves are furnaces, biological heaters engineered by natural selection to thrive in conditions that would kill most modern humans within hours. Look at this young man settling into his place at the circle's edge. At first glance, he doesn't look that different from a modern human. But pay closer attention. His chest is deeper, more barrel-shaped, creating a larger lung capacity. When he breathes, he's moving roughly 20% more air than you or I would with the same effort. This matters because breathing is how bodies maintain temperature. Every inhalation brings cold air into the lungs, where it must be warmed to body temperature before it can be used. That warming costs calories. But more air also means more oxygen, more fuel for the metabolic fires that keep you alive. Now look at his face. His nose is larger than yours by nearly a third, with nasal passages that take up 29% more space than a modern human's. This isn't about smelling better or looking different. This is HVAC engineering, written in bone and flesh. Those enlarged nasal passages act as heat exchangers. Cold air coming in gets warmed by blood vessels lining the nasal cavity before it reaches the lungs. Warm air going out transfers heat back into the nasal tissues, where it can be recycled for the next breath. It's a system for minimizing heat loss that modern ventilation engineers would recognize as elegant and efficient. His overall build is stockier than most modern humans, with shorter limbs and a more compact torso. This follows a principle called Allen's rule. Animals in cold climates tend toward body plans that minimize surface area relative to volume. It's simple physics. Heat generates throughout your volume but escapes through your surface. A more compact body retains heat 15 to 20% more efficiently than a lanky one of the same mass. The young man's body is literally designed to keep warmth in and cold out. But the real magic happens at the metabolic level. Isotope analysis from Neanderthal remains tells us something extraordinary about their diet and energy expenditure. The chemical signatures in their bones indicate they were burning between 5,000 and 7,000 calories per day as a baseline. For context, a modern human doing moderate activity burns maybe 2,500 calories daily. These bodies were running hot all the time, maintaining what researchers call Arctic mode metabolism, even in temperate regions. 7,000 calories per day. That's the energy output of 10 60-watt light bulbs burning continuously. The human body at rest produces about 100 watts of heat. A Neanderthal body at rest was producing closer to 140 watts. In a sleeping circle of 12 people, that's 1,680 watts of continuous heat generation. For comparison, a space heater you might use to warm a small room is typically 500 watts. Their bodies, packed together in an engineered sleeping pit, were a biological furnace that needed no fuel but food. Let me take you through a night in that sleeping circle at Bruniquel Cave. But this time, focus on the thermal dynamics rather than the human relationships. It's 2 hours after sunset. The fire died an hour ago, despite best efforts to keep it alive. The temperature inside the cave is dropping now at about 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside, it's below freezing. By morning, even inside the cave will drop to perhaps 30 degrees without active heating. But the circle of sleepers doesn't panic. As they settle in, bodies touching, or nearly so, their combined heat begins to transform the microenvironment. The young man on the outer edge, his body is working hardest, maintaining a skin temperature of about 90 degrees, where he's exposed to open air. The woman next to him, their backs touching, is warmer on her side facing him than her side facing away. Heat flows from high temperature to low, and his body is generating heat faster than the cold air can steal it. In the center of the circle, where that pregnant woman sleeps, surrounded by 4 others, the temperature is climbing. Within an hour of settling, the air temperature in the very center of the human huddle reaches 58-59 degrees Fahrenheit. This is maintained entirely by body heat, by the biological fact of metabolism converting stored fat and glycogen into warmth. The woman sleeps peacefully, her unborn child cocooned in warmth, maintained by community and biology in equal measure. The young man on the edge, despite his exposed position, is not uncomfortable. His 7,000 calorie per day metabolism means he's replacing lost heat almost as fast as the cold air steals it. His breathing deep and steady in sleep is warming incoming air through those massive nasal passages before it reaches his lungs. His compact build is minimizing surface area heat loss. And most importantly, the body next to his is radiating warmth that reduces his own heat loss. No one in this circle is warm in the way we might understand in our heated homes, but everyone is warm enough. That's the standard they measure against. Not comfort, not luxury, just enough. Throughout the night, people shift positions in their sleep. Someone cold moves inward. Someone too warm moves outward. It happens unconsciously, the way you might pull blankets up or push them aside without fully waking. The circle becomes a living system, self-regulating each person, both contributing to and benefiting from the collective warmth. By morning, when the sun finally penetrates the cave mouth and temperatures begin to climb back toward bearable, they've survived another night. They'll wake stiff and cold by modern standards, but they'll wake. That's what matters. This biological heating system didn't evolve overnight. It's the result of 400,000 years of natural selection in the harshest testing ground imaginable, Ice Age Europe. The individuals whose bodies burned hottest, whose nasal passages warmed air most efficiently, whose compact builds retained heat, best those individuals survived to have children. Those children inherited their parents' cold-adapted traits. Generation after generation, the winnowing continued. Not cruel exactly, but utterly impartial. Bodies that couldn't maintain warmth didn't survive to pass on their genes. Bodies that could did. The archaeological evidence supports this in fascinating detail. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, researchers found stone walls that had been stacked deliberately, creating windbreaks and insulated sleeping chambers. Inside one of these chambers, you can still see where bodies laid night after night, their collective warmth and pressure wearing smooth depressions into the floor. Experiments in 2025, using thermal imaging cameras and reconstructed sleeping arrangements, showed that a group of 12 people with Neanderthal typical metabolisms could maintain a 59-degree temperature in a 40-degree cave without any fire at all. Just bodies, just biology, just the patient accumulation of adaptations that turned humans into their own heating systems. But there was a cost to this efficiency. 7,000 calories per day doesn't come from nowhere. It requires constant hunting, gathering, processing. It requires the stored fats from those elephant bones at Neumark Nord, the marrow from successful hunts, the occasional windfalls of beached whales or trapped mammoths. In lean times, a metabolism that burns hot can become a liability. You starve faster than a more efficient body would. This might be one reason Neanderthals struggled when climate instability disrupted their food sources. The very adaptation that let them conquer the cold also made them vulnerable to scarcity. As you feel yourself drifting towards sleep now in your climate-controlled comfort, perhaps you can appreciate the elegance of this biological engineering. No technology, no machines, just bodies shaped by hundreds of thousands of winters into something capable of generating and retaining warmth in ways that still impress modern physiologists. Those massive nasal passages weren't a design feature. They were 400,000 years of individuals with slightly larger noses surviving winter just a little better than their peers, until a third more nasal volume became standard for the population. The young man at the circle's edge, the one who volunteered to take the coldest position he's carrying in his very flesh, the accumulated wisdom of countless generations. His barrel chest, his stocky build, his metabolic furnace burning bright through the night. These are all inheritance, gifts from ancestors. He'll never know who survived, so that he could be born, who passed down through their genes. The very traits that let him sleep peacefully on the edge of the circle, warm enough despite the cold. And somewhere in that sleeping circle, perhaps a child dreams. Her breath mists in the cold air above the warmth of the huddle. Her body, already adapted for cold, but still growing, is learning the rhythms of community warmth. She'll carry this knowledge, both genetic and learned, forward into her own future. Someday, she'll be the mother in the center of the circle, or the grandmother directing positions for optimal warmth. The biological engineering of her body will combine with the social engineering of sleeping arrangements to create survival, night after night, winter after winter, for as long as her people endure. Sleep now. Feel your own body's heat, that constant production of warmth you probably never think about. You're maintaining about 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit right now, without any conscious effort, a miniature furnace burning fuel and releasing heat into the surrounding air. They were doing the same thing 60,000 years ago, just doing it hotter, more efficiently, with bodies refined by necessity into biological masterpieces of cold adaptation. The same principle of life generating warmth, the same gift of metabolism transforming food into the heat that keeps death at bay. Different scale, same miracle, and miracle enough to carry you safely through this night and all the nights to come, wrapped in warmth, both ancient and eternal. Dawn comes to the Sierra de Atapuerca in northern Spain, with a particular quality of light that photographers spend careers trying to capture. The sun, still low on the horizon, strikes the limestone cliffs at an angle that makes them glow as though lit from within. But this is not morning's first appearance here. This same light has flooded this same valley every winter morning for the past 200,000 years, and for all that time there have been people here to witness it. Not the same people, of course, but their descendants, their heirs, their continuing story. There's a shelter here carved by water and modified by hands that faces precisely south-southwest. This is not accident. You don't live in the northern latitudes for 200,000 years without learning that orientation matters. The sun's arc across the winter sky is low, precious, a source of warmth that costs nothing but positioning yourself correctly to receive it. This shelter, with its opening that catches the sun from mid-morning until late afternoon, represents knowledge earned over thousands of winters and crystallized into a simple truth: face the light. Inside, the morning routine is beginning. A woman in her late 20s is awake first as usual. She doesn't need to consult a watch or clock to know it's time. Her body has its own rhythms, calibrated to the lightening sky. She extracts herself from the sleeping circle, carefully trying not to disturb the others. It doesn't entirely work. A child stirs, settles back into sleep. The grandmother opens one eye, sees who's moving, closes it again with a small sound that might be approval. The woman walks to the shelter's opening and stands in the first direct sunlight, feeling it on her face like a benediction. This is why they return to this spot every winter. Not just for the natural shelter, though that matters. Not just for the hunting grounds nearby, though those matter too. But for this moment, every morning when the sun finds you and reminds you that cold is not permanent, that light still exists, that the world will turn back toward warmth eventually. She's not just enjoying the sun. she's assessing. The light is striking the back wall of the shelter, now beginning its daily circuit of warming the stone that will hold and radiate that heat long after sunset. By midday, the back wall will be noticeably warmer than the surrounding rock. By evening, when the sun has moved on, that stored heat will be releasing slowly back into the living space, a gift that keeps giving for hours. This is thermal mass at work, the same principle modern buildings use for passive solar heating, discovered and exploited by people who couldn't have explained the physics but understood the outcome. Archaeological evidence across dozens of Neanderthal sites shows a clear pattern of orientation preference. Shelters aren't random in their positioning. They face south or southwest in the northern hemisphere, with a consistency that speaks to deliberate choice. At La Ferrassi, the shelter mouth opens to capture maximum winter sun. At Riparo Bombrini, the same. At Bruniquel Cave, the same. This is knowledge shared across populations separated by hundreds of miles and thousands of years. Face the sun. Always face the sun. But it goes deeper than just orientation. The woman standing in morning light is also observing the shelter's thermal zones, even if she wouldn't use those words. Near the entrance where she stands, the temperature is cold, but tolerable, warmed by direct sunlight that will increase in strength over the next few hours. The middle zone, where most of daily life happens, is cooler than the entrance now, but will be comfortable by afternoon as the heated walls begin radiating. The back zone. The sleeping area is currently the warmest spot because it retains heat from yesterday's sun and last night's body heat, and it's protected from direct wind by the middle zone creating a buffer. This isn't accident. This is design. Not drawn on blueprints, but remembered across generations and refined through the harsh feedback of winter survival. Shelters that faced the right direction and had the right depth to create proper thermal zones meant families that survived. Shelters that didn't meant families that didn't. Natural selection operates on culture as surely as it operates on genes. Let me take you to a different season at this same shelter, autumn 10 years earlier. The current woman's older sister is here with their grandmother preparing the site for winter return. They're stacking additional stones at the entrance, creating a low wall that can be adjusted to control wind and maximize sun penetration. The grandmother then, in her prime, explains as they work. These stones here, they'll reflect light deeper into the shelter. That gap there, it lets prevailing winds pass through without creating turbulence that would steal heat. The height of the wall chest high for an adult means standing humans block wind, but sitting or sleeping, humans are protected while still receiving radiated warmth from the stone. This is engineering without mathematics, sophisticated understanding without formulae. The grandmother learned this from her grandmother, who learned it from hers back through a chain so long that its origin is lost to time. Maybe the first grandmother of this lineage discovered the benefits by accident taking shelter in a fortunate cave and noticing she felt warmer. Maybe she experimented trying different configurations until she found one that worked best. However it started, by the time it reaches the current generation, it's refined, optimized, as good as it's going to get given available materials and understanding. The recent experimental archaeology I mentioned earlier tested these design principles directly. Researchers built reconstructions of Neanderthal shelters using period-appropriate materials and orientation patterns found at excavation sites. They instrumented these shelters with modern thermal sensors, then ran winter survival simulations. What they found vindicated 200,000 years of accumulated wisdom. A properly oriented shelter with appropriate thermal mass could be 35 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit, warmer than the outside air on a sunny winter day. Even on cloudy days, the thermal mass released enough stored heat to maintain 10 to 15 degrees of advantage. Combined with the engineered sleeping pits, proper clothing, and biological heating from the people themselves, the shelters could sustain survivable temperatures even during multi-day periods without fire. But there's a fragility here that we need to acknowledge. These systems worked because they were redundant. Fire when you could get it, clothing carefully maintained, shelter orientation and thermal mass, engineered sleeping arrangements, body heat, food stores for metabolic fuel. Each system could fail, and often did. But for survival, you only needed enough systems to still be working. Drop below that threshold, though, and the redundancy becomes irrelevant. You need fire, but can't get it. Need food, but the hunt fails. Need shelter, but a rockfall destroys your prepared site. Individually survivable, together fatal. This is what happened during marine isotope stage 3, the period of rapid climate instability that coincided with Neanderthal decline. The systems that worked for 400,000 years encountered conditions that broke too many redundancies at once. Temperatures swinging wildly meant you couldn't predict what clothing you'd need or how much food to store. Vegetation changes meant preferred shelter sites might no longer have the fuel resources nearby. Faster climate change than bodies could evolve to match meant biological adaptations became less effective. They had all the knowledge, all the wisdom. But knowledge assumes a relatively stable world where past patterns predict future conditions. When that assumption breaks, even sophisticated systems can fail. Back in the shelter, as morning strengthens, the rest of the family is waking. The children emerge from the sleeping pile and immediately gravitate to where their mother stands in the sunlight. They're not seeking her specifically, though they love her. They're seeking the warmth she's found, that patch of direct sun that feels like a promise of summer in the middle of winter's grip. The grandmother joins them more slowly, joints stiff from cold and age. But she too finds a spot in the light, closes her eyes, tilts her face upward like a flower. This moment, simple as it seems, is why they survive. Not just the physical warmth, though, that matters, but the reminder that darkness and cold are not forever, that the world turns, that light returns every morning without fail, and someday it will bring spring with it. In the depths of winter, when food is scarce and the cold seems endless, these morning moments of sun on skin become psychological anchors, proof that better days exist and will come again. You just have to survive until they do. The woman who woke first is joined by her brother now. Together, they begin the day's tasks, checking the food stores cached at the rear of the shelter, assessing whether today is a hunting day or a processing day or a rest day. Planning. Always planning. Because survival at this level doesn't allow for much spontaneity. You plan for the winter while it's still summer gathering and storing. You plan for tomorrow while living today, because tomorrow will come whether you're ready or not. But for just this moment, this morning moment when sun floods the shelter and the night's cold is retreating, they can simply stand in the light and be warm. It's a small pleasure, perhaps one of the few pleasures their hard lives regularly offer. But it's reliable. The sun will rise tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. The shelter that faces it will capture that light and transform it into heat. The stones will remember warmth and release it back when needed. These truths are certain in a world where so little else is. As you feel sleep pulling at you now, perhaps you can hold on to that image. The family standing together in morning light, receiving the sun's gift through a shelter positioned exactly right to accept it. This is the genius of persistence. Not brilliant innovation, though there's that too, but the patient accumulation of what works, the faithful return to places and practices that have proven themselves across lifetimes beyond counting. The shelter faces the sun because it always has, because that's what works, because the knowledge that orientation matters is written into the stones themselves by generations of hands stacking them just so. They endured, season after season, winter after brutal winter. They woke to face the sun and survived to see another dawn. That capacity for endurance lives in us, still written into genes that carry 2 to 4% Neanderthal ancestry, written into cultural memories of huddling together for warmth, written into the deep human knowledge that light will return even from the darkest night. Face the sun. Always face the sun. It's advice as old as humanity and as reliable as the dawn. Rest now in that reliability. Morning will come. It always does. At La Ferracie, rock shelter in the Dordogne, there is a grave. Well, several graves actually. But one in particular has haunted archaeologists since its discovery. A child, perhaps 4 years old when they died, was buried with care and intention. Nearby, another child, this one with skeletal evidence of significant developmental abnormalities. This child lived for years, survived beyond any age, where they could have cared for themselves, received food and protection and warmth through winters that would kill the healthy without mercy. This is not the story we expected to find. For too long we imagined prehistoric life as brutal as survival of the fittest in its most reductive interpretation. The strong survive, the weak perish. Resources are scarce, so every mouth to feed must justify its existence through labor. But the bones tell a different story. They tell a story of communities that refused to leave anyone behind, that valued life beyond its practical utility, that demonstrated a capacity for compassion that crosses 60,000 years without diminishing. Let me take you to Dordogne Cave in Iraq, to an individual known to science as Shanidar I. He was an older man when he died, perhaps 40 years old, which is remarkably advanced for a Neanderthal. But what makes him extraordinary isn't his age, it's how he survived to reach it. His right arm had been amputated above the elbow in young adulthood, likely torn off in some hunting accident or encounter with a predator. He was blind in his left eye, possibly from birth. He walked with a pronounced limp from a leg injury that never healed quite right. By any measure of individual capability, he should not have survived beyond his youth. But he did, for decades, because his community wouldn't let him die. Someone shared their food with him, even when food was scarce. Someone guided him during seasonal migrations, when being blind in one eye and crippled meant you couldn't keep up on your own. Someone valued his presence, his knowledge, his voice around the fire, enough to invest resources in keeping him alive, when brutal calculus would suggest those resources should go elsewhere. What did he contribute? We can't know for certain. Perhaps he was a storyteller, keeping alive the oral traditions that bound the community together. Perhaps he had knowledge of healing of which plants eased pain or prevented infection. Perhaps he was simply loved, and love was reason enough to share warmth on cold nights and meat when meat was available. Whatever the reason, his bones tell us this, he was not abandoned. He was not left behind when he could no longer hunt or fight or contribute physically to group survival. He was kept alive through dozens of winters by a community that had decided he mattered. This is not an isolated case. At El Cedron Cave in Spain, researchers analyzed DNA from multiple individuals who died in the same event, possibly a cave collapse. Among them was a mother and her child. The child, probably around 8 years old, showed evidence of severe malnutrition in early childhood, yet had survived to this age. But here's what's remarkable. Analysis of the mother's bones shows she wasn't much better fed. In the final years of her life, she was giving the child a greater share of available food than she kept for herself. Even in starvation, maternal instinct chose child over self. The child was still better nourished than the mother when they died together. Now come with me back to La Ferracie, to a winter night 60,000 years ago. The family we followed through this story is gathered in their engineered sleeping pit. But tonight, there's tension. The teenage daughter is sick, has been sick for 3 days, with a fever that leaves her shivering despite the warmth of the huddle. Her body, instead of producing its share of heat, is consuming heat from others. She's become a thermal liability in a system where every watt of body heat matters. The practical choice, the brutal choice would be to move her to the edge of the sleeping circle where her heat drain affects the group less. Or worse, to exclude her from the circle entirely until she recovers or doesn't. Resources are scarce. Winter is long. Every piece of food she eats while too sick to hunt or gather is food taken from someone else's mouth. But that's not what happens. Her mother positions her in the very center of the sleeping arrangement, where warmth collects most densely. Her siblings, instead of complaining about the reduced heat, press closer, sharing more of their body warmth than usual to compensate. The grandmother, who has seen fevers before, who knows that most pass, if you can just keep the sick person warm enough, long enough, directs the whole arrangement with quiet authority. The girl is fed first. When evening meal is distributed, receives the fattiest portions to fuel her fever-racked body. She survives. 4 days later, the fever breaks. Within a week, she's back to full participation in family labor. The calories invested in her survival are repaid many times over through the following years. But more than that, the family has reinforced something essential about who they are. They don't abandon their sick. They don't calculate survival in purely practical terms. They care for each other, and that care, that stubborn insistence that everyone matters, is itself a survival strategy. Because here's what pure calculation misses: communities bond through care. Trust builds through repeated demonstrations that when you're vulnerable, others will support you. And trust, mutual obligation, shared investment in each other's survival. These are what allow groups to attempt the kind of complex multi-day labor we saw at Neumark Nord. You can't coordinate 17 people in industrial-scale bone processing unless those 17 people trust each other absolutely. Unless they know that if someone gets injured during the work, they won't be left behind. Unless they're certain that the benefits of this labor will be shared, that stored fat feeds everyone, not just the strongest. The archaeological evidence for this care shows up in unexpected ways. At multiple sites, Researchers have found individuals with healed fractures that would have required weeks of immobility to mend properly. Broken legs especially are a death sentence in a mobile hunting society unless someone is willing to carry you to bring you food and water to defend you from predators during your months of vulnerability. These healed bones are proof positive that someone cared. Someone stayed. Someone invested their own survival in keeping a temporarily useless person alive. And it wasn't just adults caring for adults. There's evidence of elderly individuals well past reproductive age being supported by their communities. These weren't people who could contribute muscle anymore. Their value was knowledge, memory, the grandmother who knows which plants are poisonous and which are edible, the grandfather who remembers the winter 30 years ago when this exact weather pattern preceded a late spring, and here's how we survived it then. Living libraries, walking encyclopedias of accumulated wisdom worth their weight in food, because what they know can save lives. But perhaps most moving is the evidence of communities caring for children with severe disabilities. Children who could never have survived to adulthood without constant support. The child at La Ferrassi that I mentioned earlier had cranial abnormalities suggesting significant cognitive impairment. This child contributed nothing practical to group survival, could not hunt, could not gather, could not process hides or crack bones or any of the 1,000 tasks that filled Neanderthal days. This child was by cold calculation a resource drain. And yet they were fed, protected, kept warm through winters that killed the healthy. For years. What does this tell us? It tells us that love predates modern humanity, that the instinct to protect the helpless, to value life beyond its utility, to care for the vulnerable because they are vulnerable. These are ancient human traits, not modern inventions, not products of civilized plenty, but core features of humanity that evolution has refined and strengthened because groups that care for their members out-survive groups that don't. There's a hypothesis in evolutionary psychology called the grandmother hypothesis. It suggests that humans evolved longer lifespans, particularly post-reproductive lifespans for women, because grandmothers contribute to group survival in ways that more than compensate for the food they consume. They care for grandchildren, allowing mothers to gather more food or hunt without the burden of constant childcare. They process foods, tend fires, manufacture tools and clothing. They remember, they teach, they provide stability and wisdom that young adults, for all their physical vigor, cannot match. The evidence from Neanderthal sites supports this strongly. Multi-generational camps, elder care, knowledge transfer that could only happen if the knowledgeable lived long enough to pass it on. The grandmother at La Ferrassi, directing sleeping arrangements and teaching hide processing, she's not an aberration, she's the norm. Grandmothers matter. And communities that value grandmothers, that feed them through their declining years, that honor their knowledge even when their strength fails. Those communities have advantages that pure youth and vigor cannot match. As you feel sleep approaching now, as the day's concerns begin to fade and rest calls to you, perhaps you can take comfort in this. The capacity for care, for compassion, for stubborn refusal to abandon the vulnerable. These are not modern virtues. They are ancient, tested across hundreds of thousands of years, proven through the harshest conditions life could devise. The communities that cared, that invested in all their members, that made sure no one froze alone in the dark, those were the communities that survived. The cold is harsh. it's always been harsh. But what conquered the cold wasn't just technology or biology or clever engineering. What conquered the cold was the decision made over and over across countless winter nights that we survive together or we don't survive at all. That your warmth is my warmth. That your survival matters to me because we're bound together in this struggle. That love, in its most practical and profound forms, is itself a survival strategy, more powerful than any fire. Sleep now held by that knowledge. In the morning, if you wake to someone you love, perhaps you'll see them a little differently. Perhaps you'll recognize that the simple act of sharing warmth, of ensuring each other's survival, of caring. When care is difficult, these are the most ancient human actions, older than agriculture, older than cities, older than our species itself. We carry Neanderthal genes in our bodies. But more than that, we carry their legacy of care, their stubborn, beautiful insistence that no one should face the cold alone. Rest in that legacy. Let it warm you. Tomorrow will come, and we'll face it together, as our ancestors always have. The snow is falling again over the Dordogne Valley. Different snow than the snow that fell 60,000 years ago, but snow nonetheless. Winter persists. Cold remains cold. And somewhere in the world right now, someone is fighting to stay warm against the season's assault. But they fight with different tools than the Neanderthals knew. Central heating, insulated buildings, cheap energy harvested from fossil fuels laid down across geological time. We've won the battle against winter in ways that would seem like magic to those ancient families huddled in their stone shelters. And yet, we're not done learning from them. Not even close. Because the lessons written in 400,000 winters of survival go deeper than mere technology. They speak to resilience, to redundancy, to the power of community, and the necessity of care. And in our current moment, as climate chaos threatens to reshape the world, as dramatically as it reshaped theirs, those lessons matter more than ever. Let me share some numbers from our present day. According to research published in 2025, approximately 4 billion people now experience at least 30 additional days of dangerous heat each year due to climate change. Extreme heat kills more people annually than hurricanes, floods, and tornadoes combined. The number of deadly heat days has increased 200-fold in some regions since the early 2000s. We worry about warming while the Neanderthals conquered cold. But the principle is the same. Environmental extremes that push human physiology to its limits require systems, redundancy, and community to survive. The strategies that kept Neanderthals alive translate directly to modern challenges. Redundant systems don't rely on a single technology or approach. Thermal mass and passive climate control, modern green buildings use the same principles the Neanderthals discovered about orientation and stone's ability to store and release heat. Community care. When infrastructure fails during disasters, whether from heat waves or ice storms, communities that look after their vulnerable members survive better than those that don't. Every lesson from ancient survival has modern applications. But there's something else in their story, something harder to quantify but perhaps more important. It's the simple fact that they survived it all. 400,000 years of winters. 400,000 years of conditions that should have been impossible to endure. And they did it. They adapted, they innovated, they persisted. When reliable fire proved elusive, they didn't give up. They dug pits, engineered shelters, processed clothing, managed their bodies and cared for each other. They built redundancy into every system until the failure of any single element couldn't break them. And then, in the end, they didn't survive after all. Not as a species. Marine isotope stage 3 brought climate instability too rapid and too severe for their small populations to handle. But even in their ending, there's a lesson. They didn't fail because they were inferior or stupid or lacking in capability. They failed because their population was too small, too isolated, too fragmented to weather a perfect storm of environmental change. The same lesson applies to our own climate crisis. Small, isolated efforts won't be enough. We need global cooperation, large-scale coordination, shared knowledge, and mutual support. We need to be more like them at their best, not like them at their most vulnerable. There's poetry in the fact that we carry their genes. 2 to 4% Neanderthal DNA in most people of European and Asian descent. Not a lot, but enough. Enough that when you shiver in cold, your body's response is partially shaped by their cold adaptations. Enough that when you instinctively care for a sick child, you're acting on impulses refined through their generations of compassionate survival. Enough that you are in a very real sense their continuation. They didn't entirely die out. They merged with us, became part of us, ensured that their hard-won adaptations would continue even as their distinct identity faded. What would they think if they could see us now? If they could see the world we've built with its unprecedented comfort and equally unprecedented fragility? I think they might recognize both the triumphs and the dangers. They'd understand redundancy and appreciate our complex systems. But they might worry about how dependent we've become on those systems, how few of us know how to survive if the systems fail. They'd probably approve of our medical care for the disabled and elderly. That would feel familiar, feel right. But they might wonder why we're surprised by our capacity for care, when to them it would seem like the only rational way to organize a society. As I bring this journey to a close, as you drift toward the sleep you came here seeking, I want to leave you with one more image. It's the sleeping circle at Dordogne Cave, 60,000 years ago. 12 people arranged like the petals of a flower feet toward the center, where earlier a fire burned, but now only warmth remains. They're not comfortable. They're not well fed. They don't know if spring will come on time or if this winter will be the one that finally breaks them. But they're together. They're warm enough, and they trust that tomorrow the sun will rise, they'll face it, and together they'll find a way to survive another day. That image has sustained humans across our entire existence. Different details, different technologies, but the same core truth: we survive together or not at all. Warmth shared is warmth multiplied. Care given is care returned. The coldest night can be endured if you're not facing it alone. These truths are older than language, older than modern humanity, etched into our bones by the very evolution that shaped us. The Neanderthals conquered 400,000 winters. They failed to conquer the 400,000 first. But their story, their strategies, their stubborn refusal to accept impossibility, those echoes survive. In our genes, in our instincts, in the archaeological record they left behind like a message in a bottle. This is how we survived. Learn from us. Remember us. Carry forward what we learned, because the cold will always return and you'll need to know what we knew. I hope tonight's journey brought you some measure of peace, some distraction from whatever worries keep sleep at bay, some connection to the vast human story of which you are a living part. If this resonated with you, if you found value in these hours we've spent together, walking through ancient winter, I'd be grateful for your like. And in the comments, I'd love to know, where are you listening from? And what time is it where you are? It brings me such joy to imagine this community scattered across time zones. Some of you settling into sleep, others waking to new days, all connected by shared curiosity about where we came from and what it means to be human. There are more stories to tell, more forgotten chapters of human resilience waiting to be explored. If you'd like to join me for future journeys through history, the subscribe button will make sure you don't miss them. But no pressure, just an invitation to return when you need another night of gentle exploration through the mysteries of our shared past. As you close your eyes, now feel the warmth of your shelter, modern warmth, reliable warmth, warmth bought with switches and thermostats rather than earned through engineering and endurance, but warmth nonetheless. The same physics, the same biological need, the same blessed relief when cold is pushed back and comfort claims you. They knew this feeling too, those ancient families in their stone shelters. They worked harder for it. But when they achieved it, when the sleeping circle's combined heat created a pocket of survivable warmth, in a world of killing cold, the relief was the same. The gratitude was the same. The quiet satisfaction of another night survived another morning, promised another chance to continue the story. Their story didn't end. It changed, merged, continued through us. Every time you share warmth with someone you love, every time you care for someone vulnerable, every time you refuse to give up, despite impossible odds, you're honoring their memory. You're proving that the lessons they learned, the values they lived, the strategies they refined, these things endure. Cold that reveals warmth, winter that teaches us what really matters, darkness that makes every light precious. These are eternal truths written in the stone of ancient caves and the bones of ancient peoples, and the deep human knowledge that survival is sweetest when shared. Rest now. You've earned it. The sun will rise tomorrow as it always has. You'll face it as your ancestors always did. And together, sharing warmth and care and stubborn refusal to accept defeat, will continue the story they started 400,000 winters ago. The story of humans conquering cold. Not through individual brilliance, but through community redundancy care and the simple, profound decision that no one should face the darkness alone. Sleep well, friend. Spring will come. It always does. And until it does, we have each other. And that warmth, that ancient human warmth of community and care, that will be enough. It always has been. Good night.